Hello, I'm Dr. Tess Laurie, and welcome to Tess Talks. Hi Darren, it's so good to see you, and thanks so much for coming today to Bath to have this conversation with me.
Hey Tess, it's great to see you again. It's been a while. Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
I mean, you're a masculinity, femininity coach and a relationship guide. I really want to speak to you today about masculine and feminine, and discuss whether we're in a state of balance at the moment, or whether something needs shifting.
Well, I think many of us could see that if we look at the state of relationships, family, community, and the general sort of view men and women have of each other in the mainstream eye, I think we could say that there's some balance issues.
Yeah, I would agree with you. So I wanted to know if you could share with me your childhood experience, especially teenage, because I feel that that's kind of formative. And then I want to share with you my experience, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course it is. I mean, I had a very wounded relationship with men and the masculine growing up. My dad left my mum at a young age. I took it personally, as many children do when it's not personal. I then grew up really in I mean, it's difficult to speak of it now because I always have a different view of it now. But at the time, I grew up absorbing a lot of shame for the deeds of others and feeling like culture was holding me accountable for the deeds of others. And it massively affected my vitality and my willingness to show up in life. It affected my confidence, it affected everything basically. And I continued into my late teens, and there was this constant message of men being the problem and of things that men did being the problem. And I felt like I was being held responsible for that when I'd only just got here. And so I turned away from the world, was petulant, resentful, bitter, angry. And it wasn't until I started turning my attention to self-development work in my teens and started to have some breakthroughs and insights of my own that it changed. And that's when my gender journey really began of gender work. I came across who's now my gender teacher. He was an African Toltec seer. And but the thing that really broke it through for me was I realized that as this alleged oppressor class, there were places that I couldn't go unless I wear certain clothes, and that didn't apply to women. And then when I looked at those clothes, they were made up of interesting parts. And so I'm talking about, say, a man not being able to go into a hotel or a nice restaurant unless he's wearing a shirt and tie or trousers or proper shoes. And I looked at what they're made up of, and of course, the part around the neck is called a collar. And the part around the wrist is called the cuffs. And then we have a tie in this collar. And I realized, wait a minute, this fabric is a trick. Said, who wears a collar and cuffs? What contexts do people, humans, wear a collar and cuffs? And I could only see a few contexts, slaves and prisoners. And I looked out there and I only saw even the world leaders, they were never out uncollared and uncuffed. And I dug around and I could find out what people wore as ruffs in the 16th century, but I could find no record of the origins of the collaring of the men and the cuffing of the men, and why it's only the men that are collared and cuffed, why it is that we live in a graded collar system, blue collar, white collar, dog collar in the church. All the police are known by their collar number. And I'm not making it up, you know, it's just there. It's been staring us in the face our whole lives. And that was the beginning of my journey into how the sexes have been turned on each other by being tempted into blaming the other for things that maybe aren't their fault.
Can I jump in there?
Of course, because I was just about to finish and say that began my gender journey, and I've been working in teaching and serving for the last 25 years in that area. Obviously the college was just the doorway in.
Yeah. That's really fascinating, especially because I've also worn a collar and cuffs in my time.
Exactly. We'll be on to that.
Yeah.
It's what you call them masculine, not men.
Yes. Yeah. So I just tell you, my growing up, I grew up in a very I was called it a normal type of family with a mother and a father. Father went out to work. My mother was a housewife. She incredibly talented cook, a seamstress, knitter, tennis player, and 4 girls. I went to an all-girls school, so I didn't really come into contact with boys at all. My father was really my only my father, my grandfather, the only role models that I had. My mother never really felt quite adequate being a housewife compared with her friends who were out looking for work, or in actual fact, she kind of felt that us children, she was very proud of us going out seeking a university degree, and so when I had vocational guidance at school and I was good at maths and science, I was told that I could become an actuary, an engineer, or a doctor. I also enjoyed art and writing, creative writing, that sort of thing, but those weren't offered.
They weren't encouraged.
They weren't offered. I had to get something behind me. When I was 17, 18, I wanted to fall in love and have children, but that wasn't on offer.
What do you mean you want to fall in love and have children, Tess? That's some kind of human.
But in actual fact, if I could also just mention that, there was a real push on the whole fairy tale thing as well. So in actual fact, one wanted just to meet a prince and get married and get sort of saved and swept away, so one didn't have to think about the other stuff, the worries about survival and all of that. So anyway, off I went to medical school. And after graduation, I had to get a job, and I probably looked about 16, 17 when I was 23 as a young doctor. And so I soon realized that if I wanted people not to call me as a nurse, or to, and also to carry any sort of authority, I had to dress like a man. So I put on the collar and the cuff. I wore a shirt and pants. And even when I was pregnant, because I did fall pregnant while I was working as a registrar in obstetrics, I hid my pregnancy for at least 20 weeks.
Wow.
Because I knew it would be frowned upon by my colleagues, because one needed to be fully committed to the and in actual fact, to be pregnant when you're a registrar is at that time, I don't know if it's still like that, but it was really frowned upon, because we'd kind of let the team down. It meant that they might have to work longer, or one couldn't take a break. So in actual fact, with my first pregnancy, I was only given 6 weeks maternity leave, even though I was working in obstetrics, which is all about pregnancy and childbirth, and because the men only got 6 weeks. The men decided how long we got, and how long they could afford to have one off the roster. So the consequence of that was that, I worked the entire time until 36 weeks of pregnancy, and then so the point is that the system didn't really work for me, but I had to draw on masculine energy. So although I was a woman, I had to adapt to the masculine structure that I wished to enter, And I'll never forget my mum saying to me, when I had children, actually, she said, "Gosh, Tess, I thought life was going to be so much better for you than for me, because you were going to have all this opportunity. But now I see you've got to do my work as well as your work." And so, that was kind of a moment of realization for both of us, because I just ended up obviously trying to do everything and not doing anything as well as I liked, especially not the parenting side of things. So I'm going to hand over to you and ask you, what do you think of modern day parenting, and how has this affected us?
This is such a great tale, and a tragic one, as to how we have a structure that values the maintenance of what is higher than the bringing of what's new. There's you bringing a new life into the world that's paving countless threads for the future, and it's frowned upon. I mean, what a state of affairs. We're in a really tricky situation in terms of understanding this, because there was a very particular coup achieved in the late Victorian era by a chap called Edward Bernays, who was Sigmund Freud's nephew. And he had incredible insight into group psychology, really incredible, staggering insight into group behavior. And he abused it and used it against people on purpose. It was him who convinced women to smoke when they didn't smoke. And he did it by convincing them that they were torches of freedom, and that it was a sign of their liberty. And it was really just a sales pitch. Another thing he was involved in was the sales pitch that somehow a woman being at home and raising her family was imprisonment, but wage slavery was freedom. And now we are only now starting to have women who are understanding the cost of that. And it's enormous. And the Russians have an understanding of this, because communism did this to them around the same time. And they developed a saying of saying, "Oh, now we have to be the horse and the bull." And they realized it was a big con, and that's why a lot of Russians and Eastern Europeans don't truck with a lot of the feminism thing, because they're like, whoa, we've been down this road. And we'll find that, and what we'll often find is Westerners will often view those women as being quite masculine because of that history, but they are reclaiming their feminine now in a way that maybe Western women are slightly more masculinized at the minute. And there's something else in this, that's something that's happened in my journey as a father, which relates to this specific question about parenting in the modern day. Because I had an absent father, and I made a vow as a young man I would not be like him. And what I've learned is that children make ignorant statements of conviction about things that they don't really know anything about. And I had done that, and it cost me dearly. And I've been working for myself exclusively for about 15 years now. And my number one priority was to do as much at home as possible, from home as possible, to get back home as soon as possible. Not realizing how much stress and suffering that was putting me and the kids under, because I had the illusion of availability. I was there, but still not there. And they were confused and suffering, and I was confused and suffering, because I wasn't able to focus and get the tasks done. I wasn't able to be able to respond to them in the way that I wanted to, and so I wasn't being able to give the quality of relationship that I'd hoped to, that simple presence might have in my fantasies have afforded. And I learned that there are sacrifices to being the mother who chooses to raise children. And there are sacrifices to being a father. And I've realized that the sacrifice of the mother is that she can't get away from the children. And the sacrifice of the father is that he can't be with them. To do his work, he can't be with them. Because the depth work of bringing the new, which is really what the masculine is about, is building the next camp, bringing the next new. There's one notion, the kind of the real masculinity that's seen around town is really maintenance masculinity. It's not pioneering, innovative. It's process operation rather than process innovation. And the process innovation stuff really is no place for children, And so there's a lot of the process operation, the power plant, it's no place for children. The mine is no place for children. The wilds are no place for children. innovating things when you've got limited resources and no warm place to go at the end of the night. There's no place for children, not when you've got somewhere better for them to be. And then through my journey with my ex-partner around modern day views of parenting, of the equality of all tasks, of the equality of all deeds, I've discovered that it's just not true. Because there are certain tasks that I can do that it doesn't matter if I'm interrupted 20 times when I'm doing them. I can be interrupted 20 times while I'm picking stuff up around the house. I can be interrupted 20 times when I'm doing the dishes or things like that. The depth of the task isn't affected. It takes me no time to come out of the task, not to go back into it. But if I'm writing a book, a course, and this is for women too, you know, if I'm crafting the new in the unknown, if I'm venturing into the night in mystery and doing stuff where the structure isn't there yet, there's depth required, there's focus, there's immersion. And as you well know, that can even happen on an intense phone call, that if you get distracted on a call, it takes time to come out of it and time to go back into it. And the deeper the task, the more complex the task, the more complex the project, the longer it takes. So parenting, I think, is really misunderstood these days. I think another aspect of it, because we are talking specifically about parenting, we'll get back on gender in a second, is this notion of authority. And authority is an interesting one because it's got the word author in it. And if you look at the suffix ity, if we talk about serenity, it's about being serene. You know, if we talk about, I don't know, what's another it, you know, infinity is about being infinite. You know, and so authority is about the author. So the author is the storyteller. You know, the storyteller at home that tells you the rules of the home. What time you come home, when you tidy up, if you do the dishes or not. You know, the government is the storyteller in one respect. And in a way, as we seek to reclaim our own authority, it's about reclaiming our own story, without it being about the stories of others. But in parenting, the problem is, I think, that a lot of parents seek to be the storyteller when it's not really the role. And really the role of the parent, to me, is really the first superpower. And the first superpower is supervision. And supervision is when somebody can see something that another cannot, and then acts out of care. And so I know that if a child puts his finger in the socket, there's a risk of a shock. The child cannot see that. So when I stop them, it's not because it's my story that I don't want them to do that I have a preference they would do something else, which is so much of parenting. It's because there's genuine risk there that they can't see. And so for me in my parenting, it's really trying to watch out from where I'm trying to be the dictatorial storyteller because of my own preferences of how I would like the day to look. And when I'm moving from supervision, which is really just, well, here's a free being looking to explore the world. How can I just make sure there's healthy boundaries there and take care and really help them process the world rather than seek to control their experience of it.
You know, I regret as a working mother my entire life, I haven't been able to fulfill that role of supervision.
Such a cost.
And so the baby I was speaking about when I was pregnant as a registrar, he died a couple of days after birth, and it's been an enormous it was an enormous moment of learning for me that I couldn't just be as a man and do something like be pregnant and present and nurturing and caring and welcome new life. Exactly.
That's it. Yeah.
So it was such a big lesson, and it took me many years to work through and understand what it actually, you know, why I had to learn that lesson.
High cost.
Yeah. But nevertheless, you know, I had that experience, and I then with my first beautiful baby, found that I needed to get back into the system, you know. So after a year, I had to outsource the care of my then second child to a wonderful woman who I was very fortunate enough took care of her and my subsequent children. But it was a real struggle to find the balance, because in the nature of my work was that as a person working in labour ward, a doctor in labour ward, I would be away from my children for 24 hours, if not more. And so it was tremendously painful to not, to be unable to fulfill that very, what felt essential part of my well-being as a woman, and also as a mother. And so, and as the years went on and technology came in, it felt like not only had I outsourced the care of my children to the government's education system, but also to big tech, because it soon became apparent that if I had to go off to work in Geneva for 3 days or 5 days or whatever and come back, in actual fact, the messages that I had to share and the concerns and all, I no longer had any influence over my wonderful children. And I have to say, they are wonderful children, and they've grown up very well without me, being there as their 24-hour guide and supervisor. So I guess where I'm, the reason why I wanted to speak with you about this is because I just think we're at a time now, we have this experience. I don't think I'm alone in my experiences. I know there are many women who've had to step up and or step sideways into a man's shoes, or try and be hunter-gatherer as well as mother and nurturer, and I think the result of this, if you can imagine me sitting here instead of how I'm sitting, but sitting in a collared shirt and some trousers, and my hair tied back, and a blazer probably, and saying to you, I feel that women like me have taken on so much masculine energy that we've actually, and I'm saying this with absolutely no blame at all.
Absolutely.
We've done it because we felt we needed to.
Absolutely. But
we've contributed to masculinizing the world.
Yes.
Instead of, and there's no blame or judgment in this. It's just looking at it and saying, in actual fact, we need to rediscover our voice as a feminine voice, and we need to bring that feminine, because the earth's imbalanced at the moment.
Yes.
I mean, we're certainly imbalanced. I experienced that deep sense of imbalance for more than, let's say, 30, 40 years, where I just did not feel right in myself, and it felt like there was no option. It felt like there was no choice. I was on a path and I had to do it.
I agree.
But now I see actually we do have choices, and we always had a choice. And we can make new, fresh choices now, and look at what's important and how we bring feminine energy, which is the energy of Mother Earth, and
absolutely.
Nature, and caring and nurturing, and
absolutely.
And how do we bring that into where we are now and just restore the balance?
Very good question, and not an easy one to answer, because as a species and as individuals, we're in the midst of an immensely complex transformation process, immensely complex number of variables and sensitivities that we have that cause, so our nervous system has many experiences and encounters with other people based on how skillful those other people are with their feelings and thoughts or not. And, nervous system stimulation is the same for all of us, but how we interpret it is different. And the complexities of the range of human interpretations of what their senses are telling them is a massive sea of confusion. And the subject nowhere more so than the subject of gender, because of the confusion between the external and the energetic of it. And when I say the energetic, what I mean is the kind of the abstraction, the thing which gives rise to what we call gender. So I'll give an example of what I mean by that, where, so when we talk about shared humanity, a lot of people think it's, well, we've got two eyes, two arms, we're born and we die. But there's more to it than that. Like, how we feel is shared. What we feel might not be. So I might feel happy, you might feel sad, that's not shared. But happiness is happiness and sadness is sadness, despite the fact there might be a million triggers that could cause those feelings. But then how we act out those feelings is also nearly infinite. So anger is the best example for me because it's the most bullied emotion of all. For most people, when it first shows up in life, because it's unskillful, people get told to put it away. And when it's gone, come back and talk about it. And what that means is people don't become skillful with anger. They become indirect with it. And so we end up with these really weird pantomimes of anger, where some people go, wah, 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 wah. And others will go, right, yeah, I'm not inviting you in next time. Won't phone you for 2 weeks. I'm going to give you a bit less food, crap cup of tea, close the door. 1,000 different behaviours. It's all anger. It's just anger. The same root thing gives rise to 100,000 different pantomimes. Gender's like that. And when we throw the baby out with the bathwater with gender, what we do is we associate behaviour with the root energy as if to say, this is anger. When it's like, no, that's unskillful anger. Healthy anger is being able to feel anger and let somebody know that you're angry and why and what's going on. And this is what it is to have temper and temperance. You know, lost temper though applies to more than anger. It applies to all feelings that you are not in control of. You know, if you can't get out of bed in the morning because you're so frustrated or overwhelmed or sad, then you've lost your temper with your sadness. You've lost your temper with your frustration. You can't, it's got you, you know, you've become brittle and unreliable for yourself. And temper is about turning something that was brittle and unreliable into something that's useful and reliable. And we can do that with all of our feelings, and certainly with gender as well. But when we look at masculine and feminine, it's tricky because it looks like a million different things. And what our culture has done is tied it to very limited things like job roles, garments, you know, silly things like that, preferences of clothes, denoting a sexuality, when it's a nonsense, because as we've already discussed, we all have masculine and feminine in us. But then what does that mean? What does that look like? And this is where it's tricky. I mean, I teach from a particular tradition. Very few have a gender tradition, you know, I think, because in terms of our connection with more indigenous cultures, we don't have many that really have a lot of specific gender insight, but my tradition did. I feel very blessed for being drawn to that. And then it's very clear, and another gender exploring cultures, the work that I teach correlates with it all. There's no conflict. And there's a general consensus that sort of that which is feminine is accepting, it's receiving. And that which is masculine is not accepting in all of us. And so what we have in my tradition is that we have the energy of acceptance and non-acceptance in all of us. And what we have seen in the rising masculine, that masculinization of women, which really from my point of view is part of a spiritual transformation, but others might not have that view, but it began a couple of 100 years ago. And it was, I mean, there's a big backstory to this about the gender story of humanity, but we don't have time to go into that right now. But in terms of the most recent transformation that we're dealing with, the masculinization began with women choosing not to accept the conditions. And as the energy of non-acceptance rose in them, that began to turn out as different behaviors, which were to say, you know, and the way that it works in the system that I teach from, basically, we look at gender as an expression of electromagnetism in the human form. And so the energy that causes planets to come into closeness and distance, that which causes the tide to come in and go out, is the same that governs penetration and withdrawal, or the closeness and distance in relationships. And the language of electromagnetism is really interesting because we already use it in relating. We already use it. We talk about attraction, we talk about repulsion, or feeling repulsed by somebody's advances. We talk about the spark. And then we use interesting words like a man's capacity, that's electromagnetic. A woman's resistance, that's electromagnetic. You know, and it's because in my system it's really like, well, that's what it's all about. And what we're dealing with in terms of understanding gender imbalance in the world, it's all about who's in charge, which is electromagnetic. And it's all about understanding what positive is, because positive is electrical. It's nothing to do with a mood, nothing at all to do with a mood. And so really what started to happen was women started to take charge of their desire for change. And that's the masculine, because if you're in the feminine, you're accepting. Everything's all right until you want change, and change happens from feeling. That's feminine. So all of us, whenever we are feeling, that's our feminine. When we interpret and decide to bring change based on that feeling, that's our masculine. And so that happens through the building of charge, which we then seek to do. Like women, everybody's well aware that women have a menstrual cycle and that it modifies their energy levels and behavior. People aren't generally aware that men have a charge cycle. And just as the female cycle is related to the moon, the male cycle is related to the sun, there is some science behind this. This is what's behind the spring surge in fertility, is the solar change. The morning glory is solar related. And it's because the male charge cycle is solar related. So, but all of us have issues with taking charge. And in fact, the collared masculine is all about not being in charge. It's all about someone else being in charge. And if we look at the symbols on many flags, what we see is the symbol for positive. That shape, the cross, the plus. It's actually the shape for positive. It's for who's in charge. And when we are looking to take charge of our own state, which is sovereignty, then we have to deal with those who seek to be in control of that state, who seek to goad us by feeling inadequate in our own state, which is really at the hub of the calling. And really the calling of the masculine in men and women is really about so that we don't believe in the value of our change, so we won't even bother trying. And it's to make us feel so worthless and so inadequate that we won't even bother. So that we won't take charge, and instead we will seek discharge. And what we find is our culture is set up for the unskillful discharge of masculine energy in men and women, which is what pornography is about. It's what the football stadium's about. So what do we call the atmosphere in the football stadium? What do we call it? It's electric. It's charged. Because it's for the venting of unskillful frustration that has no room to move elsewhere, because people haven't been guided into how to take charge of their desires for change. They've been told to go away, feel privately, come back, talk about it, and then be frustrated why people weren't responding. And it's because they didn't feel you. The charge wasn't there. Your desire for change wasn't present. You spoke about how you felt rather than from it. And the change will never come then. So when we're talking about, so what's happened is we had this masculinization of women happening, which was this rising energy of non-acceptance to bring change. And in that time, while women were kind of in this movement, something really interesting happened to the men in Europe. Something really interesting happened over the next 100 years. And that was they all died. They died in the wars. They were wiped out. And the boys were left with the mums. And what we have lost track of as we look at the masculinization of the women is the feminization of the men. And the feminization of the men has been taking place for almost as long as the masculinization of the women, so that now we're in a situation which is we have hypermasculine women who are racing around to take charge, pointing out everything that needs to change, all the things they don't want to accept, not able to enjoy and receive the changes that have already been made in that direction.
Yeah, so I think it's really important to recognize that whilst many women like me have contributed to masculinizing society, the women who do represent and have maintained their feminine energy have lost their voice, and they've been
I agree.
They've kind of been had to go
Totally
underground.
Totally agree. They've been squashed out by the women. The women silencing them against the feminine. It's been incredible to see how many women have turned on the feminine.
Yes, I suppose one can be quite judgmental about a woman who's not working, for example. She's just doing that. She's just baking and looking after her children. I think we've all.
But just on this point of masculinization of the world, it's an interesting thing because I don't see it like that. I don't see that that's what's happened. What I see is, just on that previous point I was talking about the energy of acceptance, so what we've seen rise in men is this feminization, which is a rising inability to take charge of their feelings for change and their desires for change, and a rising acceptance of that which they actually find unacceptable. And that's feminine. Now, feminine teachings are great for healing trauma and the past and that which is difficult to deal with, because often struggling to accept that which is difficult or ugly or unpleasant requires a real softening and softness. And this is what acceptance energy is. And that is really feminine, which is you're welcome as you are, And when we say the masculinization of the world, in the system I teach from, what we see with the masculine is the masculine builds structures to enable the feminine to flow in. And when the structures no longer serve that purpose, or they become so cumbersome that the feminine can't flow, which is for us to feel good in, anyone, man, woman and child, to feel good in, then that structure is no longer serving well-being and needs updated. What we've done is we've continued to add new structures, not understanding how to really take down the ones that are from the past. So when we're talking about, say, patriarchal notions or masculinization in the world, it's not a thing that's happening now. This is an edifice of the past that has continuity. And we really have to watch our vigilance on that, because when I look around in the world, I don't see too much masculine, active, live, current masculine energy. I see too much feminine. I see too much acceptance. I see too much tolerance of the state of my life, as in myself or anyone else, as in accepting too much my non-pursuit of my aspirations, accepting too much the non-pursuit of my desires for change. This is feminine.
So it sounds I absolutely agree with you, and the way you've put it, it just shows it's showing me that we need masculinity to be restored to the masculine, and we need femininity to be restored.
That's why I do the work with men now. That's exactly it, and that's why I've been focusing on that for that. Because the thing about the feminine is, and to understand it, we shouldn't look between man and woman. We should look to the masculine and feminine within. And that is, if we look at the relationship between masculine and feminine within. So what I mean by that is, when feeling comes over you and comes out, and you're overcome and have a wee dance or have an outburst of some kind of joy or creativity or playfulness or something, and it doesn't quite go quite right, or it isn't quite well received, how do you speak to yourself? What do you say to yourself about the way that came out? Do you speak well, or do you judge and criticize yourself for it not being perfect, for it not being great, for it not being good enough? That's the conversation between the masculine and the feminine within. The feeling is going, yeah, I'm in flow and I'm just feeling this. And then the masculine turns around and goes, you twat. You idiot. You fool. I'm going to crush you into the ground for that. That's the real patriarchy. And here, against your own feeling nature, and projecting that out onto the world is meaningless if you have not done the work in here. If you are not creating spaces that welcome your own inexpert feeling, your own magical, playful self to show up then you should just shut up.
Yeah.
You know, that's where the work is.
That's actually, I was reading a book at the weekend, about Shambhala, and it was saying, you know, it's about discovering the sacred warrior within, and it's very much, you know, being a warrior. It's not about a war. It's about not being afraid of who you are.
That's it.
You know.
That's it. It's the fight to champion the space for your feeling, because nobody else might welcome it, and it may not have been welcomed when you were a child. We have this thing when we were kids because, and again, this is the blindness of the child, and it is that we're born into a world that's already full. Everybody's life is already full, and us just starting to take up space that's ours, clumsily, buffoonery, spasming with energy all over the place, we get the message that us just taking up our natural space is somehow an imposition on another. And so we contract. And we start to police. And that is the beginning of Rapunzel getting put in her tower, of Sleeping Beauty going to sleep, and all of us, man and woman, of Hansel and Gretel hiding in the house, fear of consumption, fear of being consumed by the world, fear of being whatever.
Yeah, and actually what you were saying about having that patriarchal voice in your head, you know, saying this is not acceptable and that's not acceptable. Now that you raised it, I realize I lived with that for the first 30 years of my life.
Everybody does.
Saying, yeah.
Everybody does. And it's actually conditioned into us, and it's not anybody's fault, because it's these are cultural residues of people who didn't have insight and understanding, people who weren't welcomed in the world. You know, it's one of the first things I do with the men is just, you know, welcome them into the world, because so many just have never been welcomed. You know, and it's like, oh, if you're not welcomed, then no wonder we're all contorted and deformed and all the rest of it. And, you know, the only way to make room through that is to make a larger space, because there's a lot of feeling that needs to move, and it's not going to move skillfully. And so we have to make room for that inexpert period to allow for the blossoming of the expert. And that to me is that balance of masculine and feminine, which is the only reason I am creating a structure is so that feeling can move more healthily. It's the only reason for it. And in a way, this is where masculine and feminine works within all of us. And when we talk about patriarchal notions in the mind, really, it's got nothing to do with men. We're talking about the judgment of consciousness. The judgment of consciousness has got nothing to do with man or woman. Your consciousness judges your imperfection. That's the beginning and end of patriarchy, right there. And what I do in the work with people is help them update how they measure themselves and the world in terms of inappropriate. It's like you would never shout at a 6-month-old for not being able to walk, because it has no practice. So how, if you've only given yourself, if you look at how many hours practice you've given yourself expressing sensuality, sexuality, anger, sadness, while live, most people have had very few hours of actual practice. And the way they speak to themselves, the way they abuse themselves, the way they don't show up again, that's the crime. That's the crime right there. Don't be pointing at the people out in the world if you are at home absolutely being a tyrant to your own feeling. You are the patriarch. You are the tyrant. Don't go pointing the finger at anybody else. Start to learn to take care and make room for your own feeling. Then maybe we can talk. Yeah. I mean, the more I think about this and everything that's going wrong and everything that needs to change, you know, in the world in general at the moment, I realize that everything's already been said and done and written down. The wisdom's all there. We've just disconnected from it. I agree.
And so I think it's really exciting to start exploring this again and realizing there's this wealth of innate human wisdom.
Agreed.
That's accessible to all of us. We just have to open our eyes.
Nothing is lost. It's like the universe can't leave anything behind. There's no slug trail of the cosmos that's left something from 4,000 years ago that we can't find. Everything is here now.
Yeah.
This is the true meaning of research. It's to look again.
Wonderful. Research.
To look again. It's like exploration is innovation, but research is like, maybe we missed something. Should we just look again?
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, I like that a lot.
Yeah, and this is where a lot of our process moving forward has to go. But I just want to say something on this point of, again, this notion of, as you're saying, women coming into a masculine world. That's not really what's happening. They're coming into their masculine. Because what happens is, in the system I teach from, you know, all children are feminine. And that's because they can't take charge of anything. They can't go and get new resource. They can't make any points and draw any lines and any of that sort of stuff. In fact, a child has to be open to receive everything in the world. They must accept any condition, because otherwise, how can this new life find its way? And in fact, that's reflected in biology, where all mammal fetuses are female first. And it's because we must be born in a state of total receptivity, which we are. But then in a way, it's like both have to move into the masculine, men and women, and they do it in a different way. And it's because we have to move from receiving the points of the world to conceive with them, because we're feeling, that's the feminine, I'm feeling, all right, world, this is what I've been born into, this is what this feels like. I'm building a charge here over the upset of my outrage, of my disgust, of my anger, and my frustration about all these injustices or wrongs or crimes that are around. And the moment we move to start to say, I think that should be different, I'm not going to accept that. No, that's the masculine. That is, I no longer accept the perfection of the now. Because feminine teachings is, drop into the perfection of the now. Accept everything as it is right now. And all Western spirituality has been feminized. All of it. It's been totally sanitized. So it's all about accept everything as it is. It's like, well, that's great, but why is it? As soon as I come out of that blissful, mindless meditation, as soon as my consciousness turns back and brings back its balance, after me parking that balance to receive and meditate, why is it that within nanoseconds I can move from I accept the perfection of the now to, but I wish people weren't being bombed, I wish kids weren't being abused, I wish animals weren't being abused, I wish I had more money in the bank, I wish this was happening, I wish that was happening. What happened to that perfection of the now? So it was perfect. Wait a minute, weren't you there? Wasn't it real? Didn't you genuinely feel the perfection of the now? But isn't it also true that it would be good if people weren't being bombed and kids weren't being abused and there was more money in the bank? That is the truth of gender balance right there. I can be from one to the other in seconds. Gender fluidity is having the skill to do so. But what happens in gender imbalance is people get stuck in acceptance and they can't move to change their lives. They can't bring change. They're stuck in entropy. And then the other side, the driven, frantic, anger-dominated world of constantly seeing that which needs to change and never being able to enjoy that which is modern feminism, because it's so masculinized. Instead of seeing all the changes that have happened in our culture in terms of changes that have happened, most people I know who are masculinized women are not able to pause and enjoy it, because all they can see is the next thing that needs to change. And it's like, oh, wait a minute here. There was a list of 100 on it. 50 have been done. Are you able to pause to enjoy them for even a moment? And if you can't, it's gender imbalance. You're stuck in this. You're stuck in the change maker. So what you have is, we have this really spiritual platitude. Just be yourself. Just be yourself, guys. Just be yourself. Well, that sounds easy, doesn't it? I can, as a male, reject society because I'm not happy at the way it didn't welcome me and told me it doesn't want me and blame me for everything. Play a PlayStation, drink beer, smoke weed, use porn, disengage from the world, and claim I am just being myself. Eat it. But is it true? Is that true? Is that what being yourself means? It's not. We are in the process of becoming ourselves. And the being is the feminine, and the coming is the masculine. And the being is the acceptance. And the masculine is that which is to come. It's not here yet. Everything the masculine produces becomes feminine. It gets handed over and claimed by the feminine. In terms of biology, the male produces and the feminine consumes. And then she conceives with that and you get something new. That's really what's supposed to happen in gender balance, is the masculine, the consciousness, innovates the change based on how we feel. And then the structures that are made from that, we are able to enjoy. So that happens within us and it happens without. The point is, it has to begin within. It has to begin within in terms of, so that's the real rite of passage. The real rite of passage isn't about when you're 14 going and doing something difficult. The real rite of passage for men and women today is when you have received the points of the world and you have felt them, and you have feeling in charge in relation to things that you think should change, your rite of passage begins when you say, I am going to do that. I am going to bring the change. I am going to seek to make it better for myself and those who come after me. And that is what I call the bubbling pool of goodwill that is the spirit of the masculine. And it's in all of us. And I've seen it in countless men I've done rites with. And that is that when we are tested with the unknown of new experiences and new feelings, everybody has it in them. If they don't collapse and give up, that's the negative side of spirit, is it's so easy to give up. But on the positive side, everybody goes, in one way or another, I'm paraphrasing, what can I do so that when I come back, I can stay longer, go deeper, go further? What can I do so that when those who come after me don't have to feel as much suffering as I did? What can I do so that those that come after me can go further and deeper and longer than I was able to, perhaps with greater ease? And that is the goodwill that actually lies within all the structures of our culture. The shelter, the water from the tap, not having to smell your poo. All of these things are ancestral gifts to say, you don't have to worry about this. We've taken care of that. You don't have to worry about the rain on your back. If it's raining outside, you don't have to feel it. We'll give you these gifts so that you can do what we couldn't do. And that's what we are facing now, because we have insight they didn't have. They were caught with these currents of feeling, acting them out unskillfully, looking at the destruction of their lives and relationships and their broken children, wondering why, how. But they had other concerns. They had the harvest, they had the shelter, they had the rain, the inappropriate tools. So they had to turn their attention to those things. Well, we've got all that now. They've taken care of all that. And we are being left with the work undone, which is, all right, these structures are great, but it doesn't feel that good.
Yeah, no, I think certainly looking around, there is a preponderance of dis-ease in both men and women and our children.
I agree.
And so clearly there's something very wrong and imbalanced that needs change.
Yeah.
And I think...
And that's beyond gender. That's before gender. That's both of us that are affected by that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, you know, what I'm understanding now is that equality is not
doing the same thing.
Equality is not doing the same thing.
That's right.
Okay, equality, we are equal because we are each complete with our masculine and feminine energy. Right. So I have masculine and feminine energy. You have masculine and feminine energy. And so we are each complete, and I don't need masculine.
So beautifully put. We are complete and whole, yes. Beautiful.
I don't need masculine. I don't need to set my life dreams and goals on falling in love and all of that, as we are taught as children through fairy tales and so on. I'm complete because I have masculine and feminine energy, and you are. And should we meet, well, hopefully we bring ourselves, and we don't need stuff from each other, and that way, one in a relationship, one grows together.
Yes, we're moving out of codependency into interdependency. Yes.
And so it does make one wonder what, well, not wonder, but, I think if one is both masculine and feminine in energy, then one is androgynous. And I think if we look at that term androgynous and realize that does not mean I'm sitting here with no breasts.
That's right.
And we all look the same.
That's
it's not
right,
about external.
Yeah.
It's about internal.
That's
and internally, we are all equal.
Yes. And both principles are active and alive. Androgyny is not sort of like the volatility of masculine and feminine neutralizing into being neither.
Yes.
It's the healthy movement between the two. It's like, I mean, the way that it really works is, and I get into this with in the work I do with people, but really, all the time, we move from masculine to feminine as often as the way left foot and right foot move when walking. There's no escaping it. That is, it hands over. There's no escape, because what happens is we feel and then we interpret and choose. We feel, we interpret, and that applies to saying, even just walking into a room and two friends are speaking and they don't greet you, you have a feeling, and then you say, oh, you buggers, you didn't greet me. That's it right there. You moved from feeling into measurement of feeling and judgment, choice of action. In this case, choice of action, shutdown, withdrawal, judgment, name calling. Doesn't have to be that way. You could have another reaction to that, which is, oh, they're in the midst of a conversation, I'm going to do something else. Sensory stimulus is the same, interpretation completely different. But really, it literally is just like walking left, right, left, right, left, right. Try just hopping on one leg, see how well your walking goes. It's not possible. It's not possible to eliminate gender, because it's built into the cosmos. It is the energy of transmission and reception. And that oscillates all the time. If we want to talk about healthy androgyny, so I wasn't going to do this, but really, in the gender system, what we look at is because of what I call the fig leaf wound. So the fig leaf wound is in our culture. We'll talk about all our ideas. We'll share our feelings with anyone. We'll talk about our politics, but not the fig leaf. What goes on behind there, you don't get that. So the fig leaf wound means that we can't get the higher correspondences and fractals of gender that go all the way up to what governs planets coming close and distant. And it means that we don't understand the next level of it. For example, most people think communication, presentation, and expression are synonymous terms, but they're not synonymous. They're completely different ways of sharing, of transmitting. And really, communication is actually about helping somebody to conceive. And that is the product of gender. Conception is to have an idea. That is the product of gender. Communication is not about expressing yourself or presenting, which are a bit more like masturbation in public. Communication is about enabling conception in another. And if you don't understand gender, if you're all wounded around the fig leaf, then you're not going to be able to enable others to conceive. And so then, if you want to share, feel heard, feel connected with another because they understand you, you need them to conceive with what you're trying to point out. And you just expressing yourself ain't going to do it. But if you don't understand this, you're going to have a person going, but I'm expressing myself so clearly, and why am I not being effective? Why is the change not happening? I'm such a failure. And it's like, nobody showed you you're using the wrong method. If you just tweak it and do it this way, instead of singing, try talking, different ways of using sound, different ways of actually connecting, difference between presentation and communication, if you understand it, completely different outcome. And so the gender journey continues, even further there, but unless we get a handle on it at the most basic level, we can't get the higher correspondences, and there's no getting away from it. So this massive gender confusion is a major pickle. But just to go back to the point that you said before, because I think it is more important, and it is the one about how men and women are suffering with, and children are suffering with mental distress, emotional trauma, lack of welcome, a world full of unachievable perfections.
And no rites of passage.
And no rites of passage, no guides. A bunch of people just say, well, here it is, and you know, the structures in the screen will kind of show you where to go, you know. Such a no way to welcome a human into the world. And the main point for me is, before we get to gender, we're looking at just making room for unskillful feeling is first, to me. This is the key to compassion, is if we look at a human baby, and we were all one, there's nobody who wasn't one. And so we say, okay, everybody knows it takes roughly a year for a baby to walk, roughly 2 years for it to talk, roughly, give or take. And everybody has done it. If they walked into the room, they've been through that rite of passage. They won't remember it, but they did it. They were that baby going, I want to get up. You know, fell over 100 times or whatever. And people who have parented and child development knows there is no way, really, except in really rare circumstances, that a child less than sort of like 9-10 months is going to walk. You might get an early walker at 9 or 10 months, maybe, but in general, you ain't going to get a 4-month-old walker. It just ain't going to happen. And if you look at a toddler, we have this saying, no use crying over spilt milk. Why do we have that saying? Because the child is going to spill milk. Because when you've got an arm and you don't know how to use it, it's like, I want to hug you, Mum. Why am I clawing you? Because I don't have dexterity. I haven't learned to skillfully move this arm. And then over many years of getting it wrong, holding fat crayons, tripping and falling, all the rest of it, I can become skillful with this hand that used to claw my mother when I wanted to caress her. But that took a long time, and it took a lot of practice. And there's a really interesting exercise to do with people, because what's funny is nobody shows you how to move a leg muscle or how to operate a voice box, but you can all talk and walk. And I like to get people to lift their arms. I say, go and lift your arm for me. Lift your arm and put it down. And lift your arm and put it down. And they'll say, can you tell me how you did that? Can you tell me how you did that? Lift your arm, go on. What are you doing? Tell me. Nobody has an answer. They're all right, there you were, crawling and whatever, you tripped, you fell, did all the rest of it, and now you can walk about out of the room and you're going to have no idea how you did it. You go and walk out, go to the toilet, wipe your bum, all that sort of stuff. No idea how you're moving your body, but you're doing it. That's an amazing piece of our mystery as a human being, that. And yeah, I do a lot on that stuff, getting our awareness into that place. But the point being is that when our emotions are really birthed forth at puberty, or when they start to move even younger than that, we've got to realize that they spasm and move in the same way as the physical body did. Same as our mind. They're made of a different substance, but they move in a similar way, which is they flap about unskillfully. Your feelings flaring in response to minor transgressions or non-transgressions, but reacting all over the place. Just like an arm going like this as a baby. Oh, what's this happening? All these feelings I'm lost in. Or the mind jumping about, judging you and judging others, not obeying your commands to be still. No different to a baby who's unable to command this arm. And there is no shortcut to skill in any aspect of being a human. None. Every aspect must move unskillfully at first, be witnessed, and then be brought under control. There are no exceptions. And so right from the minute our toddlers start flaring with feelings that they don't know what they are, if we meet that with judgment, derision, taking it personally as if this human is intentionally attacking us, how can a 2-year-old be attacking you? They've just got a feeling, they've got no idea what's going on with, and you're taking it personally like a petulant child yourself. If we can't make room for unskillfulness, not just in young children, but in our teenagers, when their sensuality is moving, if we expect boys and girls to be tantra masters from their first erections or first arousals, we are doomed, because we are going to see such depression, such distorted outbursts, such deviant practices through our lack of welcome of unskillfulness, those energies are just going to find their way out the back door. They're going to squeeze out in the shadows. And oh, look, that's what's happening. Because we're not making room for unskillfulness. There is no room for skill to come. And this is why everyone ends up well, is because how can a child sitting there, you know, unskillfully, yeah, bubbling excitedly to this and to this, whenever that moves, if they're being judged and derided for their preferences and their loves, that's what I noticed for myself. I realized when I was young, I thought, why is it I'm not showing up with, why do I not show that open enjoyment of something I really like? And it was like, I realized it was like, because when I was a child and I said what I really liked, people would say, oh, you don't like that, do you? Ah, he likes that, blah, blah, blah. And so what we end up with getting told is that we get these indirect messages that what we like and what we feel and what we really want isn't welcome, is stupid, blah, blah, blah. And you're expected to get it right first time, otherwise you're completely incompetent and a failure. Oh my goodness. If we cannot make the room there, forget gender. If we can't make the room for that, there's no room for gender to bloom, because it's going to move unskillfully first as well in both men and women. We just have to make the room for feeling. That's embodiment. You know, what we're dealing with is cultural disembodiment. That's why the change isn't happening. All these people filled with righteous anger, righteous outrage, brewing like a volcano, but beneath the tectonic plates themselves, completely under wraps. And then I talk about it so eloquently and so and then people aren't doing it. Why aren't they doing it? Because they couldn't feel you. They couldn't feel your outrage. They couldn't hear your tears. They couldn't hear your wails. If you want someone to feel you, then let them feel you. But you've got to let yourself feel yourself first. And because you didn't get that welcomed when you were young, you must champion that for yourself now. Nobody else will, and there are plenty of people out there like me who make spaces for that inexpertness, but you must champion it for yourself. You must make room and be kind to your own unskillfulness in the same way as you'll be kind to a 6-month-old that can't walk. Because how dare you judge yourself for not being a sexual expert or an anger expert or a whatever expert if you've never given yourself the time to practice? If you've only given yourself like 30 minutes in a 40-year life of actually approaching somebody or actually saying what you really feel or actually asking for what you really want directly, how dare you keep yourself under lock and chains? How dare you judge yourself critically? You know, doorways to compassion is right there, where it's like, as soon as you start to make that room, feeling starts to move and the world will change. And it changes because humans respond to other humans who are feeling.
I just want to go back. I just want to think about, you know, like, what is a woman? Because womb man, it's a man with a womb.
Yeah.
But so it's someone who has the ability, the potential for birth.
Yeah.
But it seems like certainly what our children and the mainstream media and seem now to think is that it's how much perfume you wear,
your
how
garments,
much makeup, the clothing, how loud you shriek or laugh, how many followers, and
how butch you are, if you got a swagger.
So all the feminine traits and signs, even, you know, one's body odor and it's all completely concealed, and hidden. So I think it's important for women to realize, and men to realize, that to be feminine is not perfume. It's not makeup. It's not what you wear. It's something inside that has to be nurtured.
That's right. But just on that as well, there's a point I forgot to make earlier, and it's really vital when we talk about letting the healthy feminine come out. Because what we're talking about when we talk about too the shadow side of too much feminine and too much acceptance being entropy. There's another side to that, and that is that if you think about that inner Rapunzel or inner Sleeping Beauty, and when it does turn up in us when we feel safe. And this is the thing, is the feminine cannot show up unless it's safe. And what we're dealing with is when the structures that were there are no longer reliable and no longer safe, there's no place for the feminine.
Yeah, not
there's
the
no room
structures,
for it.
It's the
like the banks to the river are not there, and without them, the feminine can't move. It can't flow because there's, it's almost animal. It goes back to animal in origin, and that is, the male was brightly coloured and the lion with his mane and the birds all brightly coloured was to draw threat. It was to be a target. It was to be on show, and that was to enable. And it's by drawing the threat to the male is what enabled the real female power to flow somewhat out of sight. A little bit like how their sexuality is somewhat out of sight compared to the male. It's a real mirror of that. And so in a way, the female would really come out confidently once there was a feeling that the space was safe. And the problem we're dealing with now is it doesn't feel like the space is safe. And that's why women are relying on their masculine energy because it isn't safe to be bringing out with that softness. And I really get that. I'm really compassionate to that. That's why I try and make spaces that are better both for my own feminine to flow and therefore from that for other people's feminines to flow. But it can only be done on a localized level first. It cannot be done globally first. It has to be done individually, within the family and relationship, within the community, and then you can have a country that has it. But it cannot be imposed in the other direction. It has to come from the small local grassroots, like all real change.
Yeah. So we need men warriors and we need women warriors.
Yeah.
And we need everybody to not be afraid of who they are.
Exactly. So, and also to realize that we're moving into a new understanding of what it is to be a man or a woman, like you say, in a very real way. This is why all the work I do is seated in gender mystery. And it's because, you know what, we don't know. We don't know. There ain't no manual and nobody knows. And there maybe used to be some ideas, but there were just some ideas. And so when I do the gender work with people, it's like, this isn't some course that takes you to a collapsed and complete point of knowledge. This is about realizing there's a whole unexplored area where we have senses and capacity that we can explore, but it's a mystery. We don't have the answer. And we can go on that journey together as teammates, or it can be a bickering and wrangling match of accusations for past crimes of the deeds of others on people today. Choose.
Okay, so I just remembered something, and
Sure.
and I think a little rhyme from my childhood, and I'm sure it probably is from, it's many
general one.
It's a general one, yeah. It's that, what a little girl's made of. Do you know that?
Oh, yes.
Sugar and spice and all things nice. That's what little girls are made of. And boys, snails and frogs and puppy dogs' tails.
Yeah.
That's what little boys are made of. So I think we're at a point now where we know that's absolute rubbish.
Absolute rubbish. Absolute rubbish.
And in actual fact, we're all made of all of those things.
Exactly.
And so it's, it's where you choose to place your emphasis.
And just on that, there's many, like I say, the number of variables of what we're dealing with are huge, and there's a massive thing here that's happening for us, not just within relationship, but as a species. And as we're seeing the blooming of real individuality, real whole humans coming online, the very thing that makes them an individual hobbles them at the next level, because usually to become an individual, you have to really assert yourself against things that would tell you the world is other than how you've concluded. That's individuality, to say, well, yes, you lot are doing it that way, but here are my values, here's how I do it, this is my uniqueness sort of thing. And so that kind of, the kind of fight required to claim that power of self becomes the very thing that gets in the way of us being able to connect and work together with others again. Because being an individual, you're used to doing things yourself, being complete and whole, being the masculine and the feminine, the planner and the doer, all that sort of stuff. So how is it that we now as individuals come together into a new kind of team when we're looking at not imposing external structures from that patriarchal notion of the past. So if we're not going to do that, we're just going to come together as individuals. Well, what does that actually look like as a group? Because if we're not going to control it and contrive it, then how do we do that? And certainly the work I've been involved in groups, and certainly we've talked about it, some of the stuff that we're dealing with now, both in activism and in the world and in changing the world, is all these amazing individuals with incredible skills, and they're beautiful, bright, vibrant beings, but they're not very good at working together. And we're in the middle of that puzzle. But that's the same between man and woman. We're used to it being a different way. We're not very used to working together under these conditions. So we kind of need to, and this is why I think the gender work is so important, because what's happened in the past is, just like somebody hasn't showed us how to use a hand. So imagine your hand being going down the street, you've been doing this all your life, and you didn't know, but you were feeling it. And it was like, well, where's this thing that keeps slapping me in the face? Then somebody comes on and goes, by the way, you can not do that. In a way, what's happened in our relationships is competition for charge, not knowing how to receive the point of another to conceive, not knowing how to skillfully flip from making a point and really connecting with another to being able to receive theirs. These little competitions of charge and all this sort of stuff destroy relationships. And to be able to be aware of our own lack of skill in those areas, to be compassionate to that in ourselves, knowing how difficult it is to be a skillful human being, if we can give that to the other, then we've got room for new relationship. Then we've got room for how two individuals can grow and define a new model of man and woman working together that isn't based on one being masculine and one being feminine, which, as we've seen, has definitely died out, but we haven't got the new one. It's not there yet. But for me, it can only come from this mature space of compassion around mystery, I don't know, and around knowing that despite the lack of skill in our partners, maybe they didn't mean for it to come out unskillfully. Maybe their intention was for it to be nice. Maybe they wanted it to be better. And if we can give them that, because we know it ourselves. If I know that I've intended something and I've gone and it didn't quite work out that way, and I'm like, oh, I wish that was better. If I know that's true for me, if I can give that to my partner and allow that to be true for them, that maybe they didn't mean it that way, and we can make room for these unskillful spasms, the spilling of milks when we didn't mean to make room for each other to move towards greater skill, then I think we might see that new model emerge. But we're in a process. It's not, there's no end point there. We're in the mystery. We're in the unknown right now.
Yeah, and may the journey be joyful and fun.
Yes,
I think it can
yes,
be.
as much as we can in the tests of the age that they are, indeed.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Tess. Great chatting to you.
Yeah, great.
Thanks for having me.